Hi students, welcome to lesson number 31, Globalization, Human Development and Sustainable Development. Let us start with the introduction. Globalization is the process of integrating various economies of the world without creating any hindrances in the free flow of goods and services, technology, capital and labor or human capital. One of the essential national policy decisions of the past 2 decades has been globalization. Policy makers all around the world, as part of adjustment programs promoted by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, have pushed for liberalization of their economic policies as a means for globalization and economic growth. Thus, the relationship between globalization and economic growth has received considerable attention in the recent years. Now, let us look into the objectives of the lesson. 1. To know the concept of globalization. 2. To understand human development and sustainable development. 3. To study globalization and development. Now, what is the concept of globalization? To understand globalization, according to Branko-Milanovic, globalization means free movement of capital, goods, technology, ideas and people. Any globalization that omits the last one is partial and not sustainable. The term globalization has 4 parameters. 1. Reduction of trade barriers to permit free flow of goods and services among nation states. 2. Creation of environment in which free flow of capital can take place among nation states. 3. Creation of environment permitting free flow of technology. And 4. From the point of view of developing countries, creation of environment in which free movement of labor can take place in different countries of the world. Thus, basically, globalization signifies a process of internationalization plus liberalization. Globalization and its advocacy. Now, what is the globalization and advocacy mean? Globalization indicates the desire to integrate nation states within the overall framework of WTO. It is a modern version of the theory of comparative cost advantage. The advocates of globalization defend globalization for the reasons that 1. Globalization will promote direct foreign investment and thus it enables developing countries to raise capital without recourse to international indebtedness. 2. Globalization enables developing countries to make use of technology developed by advanced countries without investments in research and development. 3. Globalization widens the access of developing countries to export their produce in the developed countries. It enables the consumers of developing countries to obtain quality consumer goods, consumer durables at relatively lower prices. 4. Globalization introduces faster diffusion of knowledge and enables developing countries to raise their levels of production and productivity. It therefore generates momentum to reach international standards of productivity. 5. Globalization reduces cost of transport and communication. It also reduces tariffs and thus enlarges the share of foreign trade as a percentage of GDP. Thus, globalization is considered as the engine of growth, technical advancement, raising productivity, enlarging employment and bringing about poverty reduction along with modernization. Now, let us understand globalization and human development. Globalization and human development promise to enhance the well-being of people and their freedom to choose in ways which do not always converge. Guided by a value-neutral, invisible hand and a minimalist government, globalization aims to do this by enhancing production possibilities and consumer choices through a free movement of goods and the services, capital and knowledge around the globe, and by improving the functional distribution of income by equalizing factor prices. The contrary-wise human development seeks to enlarge the people's capabilities to translate economic progress into multidimensional human happiness. Example, leading a long life, being knowledgeable and enjoying a decent standard of living by strengthening links between economic development and human development. Making efficient outcomes equitable and fructifying human development require the non-minimalist government, that is, a mixed economy. Globalization has been recognized as the dominating force of the economic universe. It promises to light up the world with economic prosperity. To this end, it seeks a victory of market over government and of self-interest over altruism. No less important is the global commitment to continuing, even accelerating, the pace of human development, which signifies the culmination of the historical processes of cultural revolution and a high point of what has been referred to previously by T.H. Marshall in 1950 as the revolutionary 18th century idea of the rights of citizen. A dynamic force for change throughout the world, it is expected to cause unprecedented surges in the wealth of nations by extending outwards the world production possibility frontier and by recreating the world in the image of a global village. Globalization is one of the key characteristics of the economic landscape in the 21st century, to which national and global development policies must adjust with a view to realizing the pursuit of economic prosperity. Three principal forces of globalization: the technical change, liberalization of trade, capital and labor flows, the multinational corporations which makes national economies independent by integrating them into a complex web of interlocking economic, that is, the political, social and cultural relationships. Technological change. Technological change has made it possible to increase total factor productivity, to produce goods and services in greater quantity, more cheaply and better, and still make profits. By abridging great distances that separate people and places, it has vastly increased the economy and ease with which information is stored, analyzed and communicated, so that goods, capital and knowledge travel in much shorter time and at much less expense than was imaginable even a decade ago. Of the three most revolutionizing contemporary technological advances, namely the fuel cell technology, genetic engineering and the internet economy. The internet economy is set to illumine new pathways to knowledge by extending the reach of the human mind in much the same way as the industrial revolution enhanced the power of the human hands. However, since this internet driven knowledge economy is hugely concentrated in the hands of the countable Western monopolies, its spill over to the rest of the world has been indeterminate at best, and the situation is made worse by a liberalist philosophy that does not recognize the economic rights of the poorer nations to the fruits of economic progress. Liberalization of trade and capital and labor flows. The increasing trend toward liberalization signifies a gradual lifting of the tariff and non-tariff restrictions on the flow of goods, services, factors of production, that is mainly the capital and labor, and ideas, so that these move freely across the national borders and ideally as if no national borders existed. The metaphor of a globalization induced the global village term coined by the Canadian academic Marshall McLuhan in 1962 conjures upon the image of a borderless physical or virtual mark which different people interact without having to cross national borders. A positive movement towards this goal has been facilitated since 1948 by the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that is the GATT, and since 1995 by the World Trade Organization WTO. Both these have sought, although not with much success so far, to facilitate market access and to promote the rule based trade in a multilateral and non-discriminatory fashion. Because bilateralism and discrimination between nations severely limit the possibilities of mutually beneficial trade through third market, that the competition theorems. Free markets or trade, it is widely claimed that free and perfect domestic and global markets lead to the most efficient production and consumption configurations. The basic reasons for such guarantees of market success are rather technical in nature. Now, let us study the indicators of human development. The indicators for human development and globalization are complex, as both are multidimensional and to some degree qualitative. Instead of creating new indices for measuring globalization and human development, globalization is an extremely complex phenomena and is measured by its various indicators. To some people, globalization insinuates spread of culture and ideas, impoverished workers in poor countries, damaging the environment or faster spread of disease. Globalization for some non-economists is equivalent of the extension of the mechanisms of capitalism at the world level. On the other hand, many economists view globalization as increase in international trade of both financial assets and goods that comes from a decrease in transaction cost. In the empirical literature, several variables tend to serve as indicators of globalization. For example, capital flows measured by relative size of FDI, the trade measured by ratio of total trade to GDP, which is perhaps the most extensively used measure of economic globalization. The flows of labor, that is the movement of workers between countries over long periods, the policy restrictions on international capital movements, and even the tax policies. The Index of Economic Freedom, which started in 1995, is an average of 10 freedoms that is considered important to the development of personal and national prosperity. Many variables included in this index are very good proxies for globalization. The countries with high degree of economic freedom are indeed pioneer of globalization. Now, let us look into the 10 indicators of economic freedom, which are 1. The business, the ability to create, operate and close an enterprise quickly and easily. The variables included in the business indicator include the time and cost of starting new business and ease of starting and closing a business. 2. The trade, a composite measure of the absence of tariff and non-tariff barriers that affect the imports and exports of goods and services. 3. The fiscal, a measure of the burden of government from the revenue side. The variables included are mainly individual and corporate tax rates. 4. Government, which includes all the government expenditures as a percentage of GDP and revenues generated by the state-owned enterprises as a percentage of total government revenue. 5. The monetary. This indicator combines a measure of price stability with an assessment of price controls. Both inflation and price controls distort market activity. Price stability without microeconomic intervention is the ideal state for the free market and financial globalization. 6. The investment, an assessment of the free flow of capital, especially the foreign capital, degree of government, measured by the degree of government encouragement of foreign investment. 7. The financial sector, the relative openness of each country's banking and financial system government control of the financial sector, that is the banks, the central banks, etc. 8. The property rights, an assessment of the laws that permit the property rights. 9. Corruption, based on quantitative data that assess the perception of the corruption in the business environment, including the levels of governmental, legal, judicial and administrative corruption. 10. The labor, it is a composite measure of the ability of workers and the businesses to interact without restriction by the state. It includes the variables such as minimum wage, the rigidity of hours and difficulty of finding the redundant, the poorest area in the world. Human development dimension, the several multidimensional indicators such as index of well-being, index of quality of life and social development index have been constructed. Among all these new indicators, Human Development Index HDI, developed by the United Nations Development Programme, has been the most successful and received acceptability among the development economists. Sustainability development. Sustainable development is a growth parameter that meets requirements of the current time without negotiating the capability of the future generations in meeting their own requirements. An evolution has been experienced of the concept of sustainable development over time, from the earlier time where focus was on the environmental dimension to the present understanding that sustainable development is a process that incorporates economic, environmental and societal objectives. Though sustainable development is a challenging concept, its fundamentals are very clear, which states that the maintenance of the integrity of the biophysical and natural systems. It ensures that a proper functioning of economy must be present and cultivating or upholding human well-being and health is of utmost importance. Sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all the opportunity to fulfill their aspirations for a better life. A world in which poverty is endemic will always be prone to ecological and other catastrophes. Some authorities argue that the basic needs and also which include the rights of all to preserve their cultural identity and their right to not to be alienated from their own society and their own community. A perception is followed that states that sustainable development along with globalization is an idea that can be operationalized through use of science and technical based criteria and indicators. People have different perceptions of sustainability criteria, and for some the basic impression of sustainability is to mainly focus on the depletion of the resources, while others consider it as a concept where sustainability includes contamination, conservation of ecology and its ecological aspects. Some include the traits of the quality of human life or human well-being. For globalization and its sustainability, selected indices that characterize diverse aspects of Sustainable Development Index. Human Development Index was formed to highlight the fact that individuals and their abilities should be the final criteria for measuring the growth of a country, not economic development alone. The HDI is a composite measure for assessing achievements in 3 areas of human development: healthy and long life, knowledge accessibility and the decent standard of living. The HDI is the geometric mean of normalized indices for each of the 3 dimensions. A healthy living is measured by life expectancy at birth. Knowledge is determined by an average of expected and mean years of schooling, and standard of living by the GNI per capita. The Environment Sustainability Index has been constructed by taking into account 4 areas: 1. Energy consumption, 2. Carbon dioxide emission, 3. Forest area and 4. Mortality rate attributed to household and ambient air pollution. In the arena of energy ingestion, 2 indicators are used: the fossil fuel energy utilization, which is the level of entire energy ingestion which originates from the non-renewable energy sources, which consist of the coal, oil, petroleum and natural gas products, and sustainable power source usage, which is the share of renewable energy in the total final energy consumption. Inexhaustible sources include the geothermal hydroelectric, the sun powered, the wind, tides, biomass and biofuels. As an indicator of carbon dioxide emission, human generated carbon dioxide releases curtailing from the burning of non-renewable energy sources, gas spreading and the manufacturing of concrete and carbon dioxide produced by the woodland biomass through exhaustion of timberland areas are included. The third Sustainability 2020 dimension takes into account the percentage alteration in the forest area, which is land covering more than 0.5 hectares with tree taller than 5 meters and a canopy cover of more than 10% or trees able to reach these thresholds in situ. Mortality rate attributed to household and ambient air pollution considers deaths resulting from exposure to ambient, that is the outdoor air pollution, and household indoor air pollution from the solid fuel used for cooking expressed per 1 lakh population. Encompassing air contamination is the result of emissions from households, the industrial action, the car and the trucks. The ranks across all indicators are aggregated, attaching equal weights to obtain the Environment Sustainability Index, that is the ESI. Lower values of ESI indicate greater efficiency in terms of environmental sustainability. Sustainable Development Goal Index SDGI 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including the Sustainable Development Goals SDGs, was adopted in 2015, and the 17 new Sustainable Development Goals are also known as the Global Goals, aim to and remove the end poverty, hunger and inequality, take action on climate change and the environment, improve access to health and education, build strong institutions and partnerships, and more. Compared to the Millennium Development Goals MDGs, the SDGs are applicable to all 193 UN member states and therefore both to developing and developed countries alike. In order to assist countries in measuring their SDGs, the baselines, and to measure the future progress, the Bertelsmann-Stiftung and the Sustainable Development Solutions Networks SDSN jointly released the first SDG index and dashboards in July 2016. This report aims to achieve 4 main objectives. 1. Establishing sustainable development goals in the form of a valuable working device for strategic action. 2. Supporting national debates on prioritizing basis and formulate SDGs with application plans. 3. Accompanying efforts to develop for robust SDG checking structure by the UN Statistical Commission. 4. Identifying SDG data gaps, requirements for investments in arithmetical capabilities and research, and new forms of data. The global SDG index score and scores by goal can be interpreted as the percentage of achievement. The difference between 100 and country scores is therefore the distance in percentage that needs to be completed to achieve the SDGs and other goals. Sweden's overall index score 85 suggests that the country is on average 84% of the way to the best possible outcome across the 17 SDGs. For all countries, the same basket of indicators, that is the variables, is used to produce comparable scores and rankings. The differences in rankings may be due to small differences in the aggregate score, which must be noted. The SDG index score indicates position of a country between the worst, the 0 count, and the best or target 100, the 100 outcomes. Globalization can be characterized as both more complicated and more surprising than was anticipated. One clear lesson can be learned from the many global assessments that have been produced over the past decades. The dogmatic predictions regarding the Earth's future are unreliable, ill-founded and misleading, and can be politically counterproductive. So, this analysis is beset with the uncertainties and the assumption that apply to global statistical indicator analysis. Moreover, Looking at a more detailed variable level, the analysis becomes somewhat more complex. If consumerism and global economic processes do have polluting side effects, it needs to be asked which direction these dynamics need to take for a sustainable future. Though the prevailing view is that globalization has mostly negative impacts, especially in the case of developing nations, it is probably too early to pass such judgment, and globalization may not be as evil a phenomena as it is deemed to be. What is clear is that the increasing complexity of our global society means that sustainable development cannot be addressed from a single perspective, country or scientific discipline. Planning for sustainable development in the context of globalization is far more intricate and more complex compared to most problems that have to be dealt within the past and requires global cross-country policies and the setting up of an international initiative to coordinate such policies. To sum up, in this we have learnt that globalization is the process of integrating various economies of the world without creating any hindrances in the free flow of goods and services, technology, capital and labor or human capital. Globalization means free movement of capital, goods, technology, ideas and people. Globalization will promote direct foreign investment and thus it enables developing countries to raise capital without recourse to international indebtedness. Sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all the opportunity to fulfill their aspirations for a better life. Sustainable development goals, to name few, are aim to end poverty, hunger and inequality, take action on climate change and the environment, improve access to health and education. Thank you.